Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Today, I am dead tired. We just got back from the Glen and Friends trip to Japan. I'm tired from the trip. I'm jet-lagged from the trip. Went to the grocery store, and it's kind of mid-October. Onions are on sale. About this time every year, you can get a big 10-pound bag of onions where we live. Used to be you'd get it for $1. I paid $2.99 for a 10-pound bag of 10-pound bag of onions today. And I wanted to make onion soup. I've been looking back at old recipe videos that we've done. And one of the things that I did a long time ago was an onion and stout soup that I absolutely love. And I thought, you know what, I'd like to do something maybe a little bit more traditional. Do a more traditional French onion soup. So I've got a Dutch oven here, warming it up, and I've got some butter. I'm going to put the butter in and let that melt. Now, of course, the French don't call it French onion soup, just like the French don't call it French toast. They refer to it as soupe à l'oignon. But really what we refer to as French onion soup is soupe à l'oignon gratiné. The gratiné is the important part. That's the cheese on top. That's the part that really, when people talk about French onion soup, that's what they refer to. So I get the onions, I'm doing the research, I'm pulling out all of my old books. If you want to learn about French cooking, this is Larousse. My copy is from 1938. My copy is in French. I would suggest that if you want to learn about French cooking, this is the book you need to get. And you need to get one of the printings from the 1930s, and ultimately you need to get it in French. I've looked at the French copies, I've looked at the English copies. The English translations are imperfect. Not that if you don't speak French, your translations are going to be any better, but you've got a better chance if you're working from the original. And Alex, French Guy Cooking, did a video on this in his Mother Sauce series. You should go back and watch that on his channel. And so this is onion soup. So at its core is onions. And I've got just over 8 cups of sliced onions here. And I've thrown some shallots on top. If I hadn't been doing this as sort of a budget soup, trying to use the onions that are on sale. And these onions that I got on sale are last year's onions. So they're from last year's harvest. The grocery stores or the suppliers or the vegetable markets trying to get rid of last year's onions. They were a little bit rough around the edges. Where was I going with that? At its core, historically, onion soups are found in pretty much every cuisine, every regional cuisine of Europe, going way back. Onions were easily grown, easily available, inexpensive, and making this type of soup was a really inexpensive way for people to eat. This is a budget meal going way back. Sometime in the 1940s, 1950s, it became something fancy, and the recipes changed. And that's really what I want to talk about in today's video, is how the recipes change. If you look at this book, this is La Cuisinière Bourgeoisie. This is from 1759, and there is an onion soup recipe in it. And the onion soup recipe in this book is vastly different than a contemporary 2023 French onion soup recipe that you would find on YouTube. Google French onion soup on YouTube and you're going to come up with a whole bunch of recipes. One of the things that I know from my collection of old cookbooks is the more ingredients in a recipe, the farther it is from the origin. The farther it is from the starting point, the farther it is from traditional. If it's got a whole bunch of ingredients, it's not the original recipe. And that certainly plays out here. In the 1938 Larousse, very basic recipe. Onions, butter, salt, and stock. But not even this dark brown stock. So let's talk about that next. First, let's deal with the onions. So the onions are in the pot, medium heat. I'm going to put the lid on and I'm going to let these go probably 25 or 30 minutes. No sugar, none of the older traditional recipes, none of the pre-World War II recipes for onion soup contain sugar. The onions are sweet enough. The salt is going to help draw out some of the liquid and season the soup. You don't need the sugar, you don't need the sweetness because the onions are going to bring it. The sugar does help draw out some liquid so that the onions brown a little bit quicker, but you don't need to do it. Just use a little bit of patience. This is also the point in most videos where people will leave a comment down below that if you put baking soda in, they will brown faster. They will. Definitely they will. I'm not a fan of that for this type of soup because I don't like what the baking soda does to the onions. It turns them really into mush and you can't recognize that you're dealing with onions. I still want to know that there's onions in the soup, so I don't do it for this. If I was making onion jam and I was in a thyme jam, I would put in the baking soda. There is a use case for it. For me personally, not in this case. We get to the stock. In these older books, the stock that they're asking for is a white stock or a second stock. And what I mean by second stock or white stock, a white stock is you don't brown the bones, you just boil the bones or simmer the bones in water and you pour off the stock. You get the flavor, but you don't get this dark, deep brown color. A second stock, which is what most of these older books call for, is after you've poured off that first amount of water, you refill the pot with the bones still in it, you refill the pot and you simmer it for a second time. That second stock has a very light flavor, very delicate flavor. And so when you use that in an onion soup, as they're asking for, you're not adding a lot of beef flavor. What you're adding is a supporting role to the onions. You're elevating the onions without overpowering the onions. And in these older books, they don't specify whether it's beef, veal, or chicken. They don't really care. It's whatever you've got bubbling on the back burner of your stove is what you're going to use. Remember, this starts out as a peasant budget meal. So times change. Tastes change. The 1950s come along and we start using these deeper, darker, more richer stocks. I'm using it today because that's what I grew up tasting and eating, and it tastes right to me. So I'm going to continue to use it. And this is how, tastes change recipes over time. And sort of most of what we think of as traditional recipes really happens post-World War II. Okay, so half an hour. And the onions are pretty much what I expected. Still a long way to go. But you don't want to turn up the heat. The biggest mistake you can make is to turn the heat too high and burn the onions. You don't want that to happen. You want to go slow. Slow and steady wins the day. So the lid back on. Those are probably another hour away from being done. Now, in this Dutch oven, in the oven at 250 degrees, let it go. Nice, consistent, even heat. You'll get good browning. You won't overheat them. You won't burn them. You won't, another way is to do it in a crock pot. 8 hours on high in a crock pot. Great results. Another way to do it is in an electric skillet or electric frying pan. If you still have one of those. I don't know. Do they still sell those? You probably have one. If your mother had one, you probably have one. You can dial in the heat exactly. Nice, even heat, lid on, and you're not going to worry about burning them. Next, we're going to make the crouton. And I guess while I'm cutting up the bread for the croutons, I should talk about Julia Child. She's got a great recipe in this cookbook. Her recipe uses vermouth and cognac or brandy. It's essentially the same recipe as I'm doing today, except I'm not going to use vermouth, cognac, or brandy. Sometimes I use wine. I've noticed in a lot of contemporary recipes, if you look, at recipes of people doing it today, they'll add red wine or tomato. If you like it, I mean, I'm not, me, I'm not someone who tells you what to do or what not to do. For me personally, I find that red wine or tomatoes in this recipe takes away from the onion. They start to overpower the flavor that you're getting from the onion. And traditionally, this is a recipe that celebrates a humble ingredient, which is the onion. I want the onion flavor to come through. If I use wine, and I may use a splash of wine today, I'll use a white wine because white wine just sort of elevates the other flavors without taking over. To me, red wine overpowers. And I'm already using really brown beef stock, which is a little bit overpowering, and I don't want to risk it with some red wine. If you want to use red wine, go right ahead. If you don't want to cook with wine, rest assured it's going to taste great, because none of these recipes from before World War II use wine or vermouth or cognac or any of that. It's just a celebration of the onion. Now, I'm going to cut these up. Slice them, and I'm going to cut them in half. Again, cut them into quarters. Really rough. You don't have to be too careful with it. So the crouton is one of those places where contemporary recipes differ quite a bit. You see people a lot of times cutting a piece of French bread or a couple of pieces of French bread and putting them in untoasted on top of the soup, and then putting the cheese on top. Works great. I find that it gets a little bit mushy for my taste, but that's just me. If that's the way you want to do it, go right ahead. Other people will take, again, the crouton, toast it, put it whole on top, put the cheese on top. Again, if that's the way you want to do it, then that's the way you can do it. If you go way back, though, what you're looking at is toasted croutons in the bottom of the serving dish, whether it be single servings or a large tureen. The soup on top of that, a couple of more croutons on top of the soup, and then the cheese on top of that. That's what you find in these very old recipes. Having smaller pieces of bread broken up on top and inside the soup, the smaller bread or toast in the bottom of the soup brings body. Instead of adding flour and a roux to thicken it, the bread thickens it from the bottom, and having smaller pieces on top makes it easier to eat. So I always kind of go with the smaller pieces on top and the bread in the bottom to thicken it. If you don't want to put the bread in the bottom to thicken it, you could definitely use a roux. LaRousse, in his recipe, not really a recipe. That's the thing about this book. There aren't really recipes. He describes how to make a recipe or how to cook it. He describes the method rather than the exact. He talks about using flour to thicken it. And into a 350-degree oven until they are toasty. The croutons are done. They're out of the oven. They're waiting. For about the first hour of cooking these onions, I had the lid on. I've taken the lid off at this point. This is where I want to drive off the moisture and finish that browning. I want to get them a deep golden brown. It's time to start shredding the cheese. Now the cheese that's normally asked for is Swiss or Emmentaler, but as you can see, I got Gruyere. I'm sure the package said Emmentaler at the grocery store. I don't know how it turned into Gruyere by the time I got home. Anyway, use a cheese that you like. That's really what it comes down to. One of the things I really love about cooking from older cookbooks is that they're not specific. They don't tell you that you have to use a specific kind of ingredient or a specific type of cheese or vegetable, or they really leave it open to you as the person cooking to decide what you want to use. And so I often see this recipe made with Emmentaler or Swiss cheese. That is sort of the de facto cheese that's used in most instances. Julia brings up that, you could use also a Parmesan, which I think would be really good in this. That would bring a really good flavor, although I wouldn't use Parm. I'd use Pecorino because I like Pecorino better than Parm. I think it brings a better flavor to most things that I cook with it. You want a melty cheese. You want a melty cheese. And if you're doing this on a budget and you're really celebrating the onion and doing it on a budget, use the cheese that you can afford or the one that you've got in your house. Onions are getting close. Stir them often. Make sure they don't stick to the bottom. Make sure they're not burning. And grate this cheese. The onions are really close. I think I could probably take them a little bit farther. you always run the risk of going too far. And it's a fine line between getting them just right and burning them to the bottom of the pot. And I kind of don't want to get there. You could add a little bit more water, because most of the moisture at this point has been driven off. Add a little bit more water. That gives you a little bit more time to sort of achieve that browning a little bit. Again, it's kind of iffy, but I'm going to go with this. Now, I am going to add white wine. So let's get this open. And so white wine doesn't really appear in any of these super traditional recipes in these older books. It doesn't appear in there at all, but I like what it brings to the flavor. If you are someone who wants to use red wine because you believe that red wine must be used if you're using beef stock or beef, that's the only combination that works, give white wine a shot. Just once. Give it a shot just once. I think you might be surprised at how well it works together. And in goes the beef stock. Now, I started out with a little over 9 cups of sliced onions. In the classical texts, the ratio seems to be equal amount by volume of uncooked onion and liquid or stock. And that plays out into the future into what Julia Child says and what most recipes today say. I used 6 cups of stock because I really like the onion flavor. The onion flavor is important to me. I like I want to taste the onion, so I'm a little light on the stock. And what I've made here today is notable, or the recipe that I made today, or the version of this recipe that I made today, is what it doesn't contain. I followed more closely what's in the older texts, so there's no thyme, there's no bay leaf. It's just salt and pepper, onion, and stock. I added a little bit of white wine. That's my concession to this whole thing. I like what the white wine brings. The soup is done at this point. So that is onion soup. You can put that in the fridge, forget about it for a couple of days. So if you're going to serve this for a dinner party, this is make ahead. So you don't have to worry about on the day of the party cooking down the onions and the time that it takes to do all of that. You can do that ahead of time. And quite honestly, after 2 or 3 days in the fridge, it's going to taste better. Or at least you're going to think that it tastes better. I don't know if it actually does. You can also at this point freeze that. And so when you come home from work one day and you're looking for something fast and hearty and warming, pull it out of the freezer, microwave it, and then to thaw it out, and then put it into your crocks and cook it from there in the oven. So I'm putting some croutons in the bottom of each of these crocks. Ladle in some soup. Some more croutons on top. And then the cheese. Last of the cheese. Now the oven is preheated to 450 degrees. I'm not going to use the broiler. You can use the broiler, broil it from the top down, watch it very carefully, make sure that the cheese doesn't burn. 450 degrees for 15 or 20 minutes is going to give you the same effect, and you're not going to have to watch it as closely. You still have to watch it, just not as closely. So in they go.
Hey friends, hey Glenn.
Hey Jules.
Where did you find those bowls?
They were deep. Deep in the equipment room.
The things in our collection.
Yeah, it's like a 70s dinner party here now.
We having fondue too? Just checking.
Oh, you've been to a 70s dinner party.
I think I did go to a few.
So the bowls are still hot.
I got that impression.
Pull one up.
I thought you were going to give me one too.
Yeah. There we go.
Can I assume the soup inside is just as hot?
They've been out of the oven for about 10 minutes so that they're not volcanic. They were really bubbling.
Cheese may still very well be volcanic.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's French onion soup under this, based on the bowl, the cheese, and the croutons.
Yes. It is all of those things. Okay, so. Oh.
Oh, they've got a lot of croutons in there.
Yeah.
You really stuffed those in. Oh, no, that looks too hot still. Your face suggests that it is too hot still. So take a moment, talk to your friends.
But it's so good. It is so good. Okay.
Good enough to sacrifice my mouth parts from burning them off?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
So my tip is, I made soup à l'oignon very close to, you know, what's written in these older books. If your palate isn't used to that,
That's pretty good.
bring it up to date and use all of the other tricks that people use. A little bit of thyme when you're cooking down the onions. A bay leaf when you're cooking down the
I
onions.
actually like this one a little better. Some, you know,
Yeah.
I would say I think I like this better than the more traditional version, or the version I'm used to.
The newer version, yeah. And so, you know, red wine, if you want to use red wine, I used white. You could definitely put in some cognac or brandy at the end. That would give it a little bit of a boost of flavor.
I was trying to figure out how to eat my cheese gracefully and made it a complete disaster. Oops.
If you don't want to cook with wine or alcohol, don't. You don't have to. But
The wine might be why it tastes good.
there is a case to be made in old French cooking for this. This is verjus. It's exactly what it says. It's green juice, verjus. It's made from unripe grapes. It's highly acidic. There's no sweetness. It's not fermented, so there's no alcohol. They used it a lot in soups in the 17 and 1800s. And if you can get it, that would be a great addition to this soup.
With the wine. In lieu of the wine. Okay, just checking. Just checking.
And the other thing is, I think it's so much better with tiny croutons than that ridiculous piece of bread. I shouldn't say ridiculous. It sort of gives away what I think about the piece of bread on top.
I think it's funny you think these are tiny croutons.
Broken up croutons instead of the giant piece of bread, because the giant piece of bread can oftentimes be hard to cut through, and yeah, you're doing that. Having the smaller croutons.
It's a hard enough dish to eat gracefully.
Yes. Yeah.
It's something you may not choose on a first meeting.
No.
Or a business meeting or something.
So the smaller croutons make it easier to eat.
It's a bit messy.
If you learn one thing from any of my cooking videos,
It's do your own thing.
do your own thing. Really, you're cooking for
You're
cooking for yourself. You need to please your palate. It's great to understand where a recipe came from, but you should be able to make changes in your own home to make it suit your palate, suit your needs, suit your budget. Really make it your own. It's a method. It's not a recipe. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon. It's so sweet. The onions are so sweet.
Yeah, but I don't know what it is about that I like that makes me like it better.
There's nothing in it.
Maybe that's it.
There's nothing in it. It's just onion,
Maybe it's the wine.
onion stock, and wine. And there wasn't even that much wine in it. I probably only put about a quarter cup.
I don't know. Maybe I just don't like all the other flavors.
All the
in
other
it.
stuff. It is onion soup. What you're supposed to taste is onion. Okay.